Thank you, Karen, and welcome everybody. I'm very happy to add a welcome to all of you on behalf of the Caxton Club. Our two organizations, the Newberry and the Caxton, have been quite intertwined since the 1887 founding of the Newberry and the 1895 founding of the Caxton Club. And there have been many staff, donors, collectors, leaders in common between the two organizations. Tonight, we're joined by two more co-sponsors, the Chicago Collections Consortium, and with support from Art Design Chicago, part of the Terra Foundation. Those groups also have been active collaborators with both the Newberry and the Caxton. So we're very pleased that we could bring everyone together for this program, which is relevant to all of us. In fact, the early meetings of what became eventually the Chicago Collections Consortium were often held in this very room with active engagement from former Newberry president and Caxtonian, David Spatafora. As it happens, Northwestern University, which has a large parallel portion of the collection you'll soon hear about, was also a founding member of the Chicago Collections Consortium and has had long interactions with the Newberry and the Caxton. So we're all feeling like one great big family tonight. As I said, Art Design Chicago and the Terra Foundation have supported many of these partners and activities over the years, and we're very grateful. It really makes Chicago a center for this intellectual heritage. I would like to turn now to Paul Gale, who will introduce our speaker. Paul is a distinguished historian and prolific scholar who retired from the Newberry in 2016 as the curator and is now the curator emeritus of the history of printing, had a 35-year career shaping the most important collections and work of the Newberry Library. Paul has been a member of the Caxton Club for almost as long as his career was at the Newberry. Please welcome Paul. Thank you.
You all want to hear Jill, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time. It's really strange to be the introducer of the speaker. Am I too close, too far away? But in any case, those of you who are members of the Caxton Club don't need to know anything more about Jill, although I could tell you a few things. But for those of you who are not members or who are brand new members, there are a few here, I think, you need to know about her as a Newberryan. Jill did her undergraduate and master's degrees at the University of Illinois of Chicago, and she did her master's in library and information science from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She came to the Newberry originally as a volunteer, which is the way a lot of people start at the Newberry, myself included. And she got interested in a guy named John M. Wing, who turned out to be the subject of her master's thesis. John Wing was a Chicago collector of the late 19th century. He was too eccentric to belong to the Caxton Club, but was nonetheless a significant collector and left an endowment to the Newberry, which pays for the creation and now the maintenance of a collection called the John M. Wing Collection, which includes the history of the book and book arts. Jill joined the staff after that, and in 2016, she became the John Mansur Wing Curator, or Custodian, as we in Victorian fashion say, at the Newberry, Custodian of the John M. Wing Foundation at the Newberry, which is a title she still holds. And she is also the bibliographer for British history and literature. She's going to talk about another eminent Caxtonian, Bob McCammett, and his collection, So there are lots of collectors on the program, just as there are lots of collectors in the club. Let's welcome Jill.
Okay, thank you. Thanks everyone for coming. It's such a delight to be here. And thank you to Jackie Vossler for putting this together and for Bob McCammon for making it all possible. I will say at the outset that there is somebody else who should be here tonight, Scott Kraft from Northwestern. It was really Scott and I who divided up the collection in the most collegial and fun way possible. And I'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. Scott did write some remarks for this evening. I won't read them, but I do have them if anybody would like to see them. We have them printed out later as well. So first, I will just say that it's called, I feel like I have to explain Bits and Bobs. I had a really hard time, as one is sometimes want to do, in coming up with a title for the talk because it's a very eclectic collection. And I thought about using a title from one of the books that we got, like Common Threads or True to Life, but my colleagues were like, no, we don't understand that. And finally, one of my colleagues said, what are you talking about? And I said, stuff from the Bob McCammon collection. And I said, but I can't call it that. And she said, well, why don't you use the British version, which is Bits and Bobs? And I said, oh, that's great because his name is Bob. So the other thing that I will explain about that is it really is just bits and bobs of it because it's such a wonderful, personal, and eclectic collection that if I showed you 5 things or 10 things or 20 things, you wouldn't really get a sense of what the collection is as a whole because it's personal and eclectic. So I hope to just give you a taste of that tonight. So I'm also very blind. I've known Bob McCammon or known about him or of him for many years through his work with the American Printing History Association, the Caxton Club, and the Reader, some of whose archives we have here at the library, including an actual newspaper box that readers always try to take newspapers out of, so we had to write, do not take this copy. This is also, I believe, the first issue of the Reader, and there's a really wonderful piece you can read by Bob online that talks about this and the design and the making of it that is really worth reading. So I knew him through the Reader and also through his imprint, Sherwin Beach Press. And we have all the Sherwin Beach Press books, and they're really, really wonderful. They're beautifully designed. They're really interesting, and they're so lovely to hold. They're really pleasurable books to hold in your hand. So this one has really beautiful photographs. It's from 1993. This one, The Essence of Being, was actually Bruce Beck's copy. I was excited to find when I went to look at it, and it's really charming, very charmingly printed. And this one is a particular favorite. It's about Morris Fuller Benton with a foreword by Roger Black, who I adore Roger Black's work, so I was really excited to see that. So as you can see, all of the books are different. They're all very beautiful, and so I had always really appreciated Bob's work with his press. But I didn't know that much about him as a collector until November 2018, when he invited me and Martin Antonetti, then at Northwestern, to lunch near his office / studio. He added the following note to his email. So he wrote a really long email about all the places we might have lunch. And then he wrote, the ulterior motive is to get the two of you to my office to look at my books and decide if either of your institutions want all or part of them. I've been collecting the books I admire whenever I go to a book fair as a vendor, but I should not oversell. They look rather unexciting on the shelves. So this sounded really fun to me, and when we got to Bob's studio, he had a number of books, and I think some of his favorites set up to see, and spoiler alert, he undersold the collection to us. So we had a really good time looking at things and talking about various book artists. I was only 2 years into my tenure as wing curator, so I knew less about our collection of artist books and about artist books in general. I was therefore so looking forward to working with Martin Antonetti, who is, of course, one of the great curators of artist books at Smith College and later at Northwestern. We agreed that Bob would create a short title list of the books in the collection so that we could check them against our respective catalogs. And then we went to lunch at Topolobampo. And I don't know why, but they served us slightly over-chilled white wine, and we were all like, a little upset about that. So this was at the end of 2018, and we had left it. Bob was going to make a list of the books in his collection. We were like, yeah, we're really excited. So a lot happened over the next couple of years. I had heart surgery in May 2019, and then Martin retired from Northwestern, and then, of course, the pandemic happened. Throughout this time, Bob would occasionally email us to say he was working on the book list, but that he was really, really enjoying himself. So the work was going a bit slower than expected. The list was finished in December 2020. Oops. Oh, sorry, I forgot to say, these were a couple of the things that Bob had set up to show us when we went in. And I'll talk about both of these books later. So the list was finished in 2020, December 2020, and by that time, Martin had retired and Scott Kraft had come on board, or he was already at Northwestern but had taken over the project from him. And I had never met Scott, and we've still never met in person, but I looked forward to working with him. We were working from home at this point, and we agreed that we would each mark up the lists. And Bob did a really great job on these. So they're organized by press, and then he made notes about any, special notes that he thought would be helpful to us in going through the collection. So Scott and I agreed that we would mark up each list with our institutional holdings. So we kind of went through. This was a really bad idea. We came up with purple for Northwestern, red for the Newberry. I don't have a color printer at home, so at some point I was like, it just doesn't work at all. And then we kept adding colors, and I found emails from Scott today that say, like, what's light blue again? There were about 265 things on the list, give or take a few. There were 30 things that both the Newberry and Northwestern had, and I think Bob retained these items. There were 35 things held by the Newberry but not Northwestern, and about 35 things held by Northwestern but not the Newberry. So it was easy to say, whoever doesn't have that one will get it. But there were 165 things we needed to decide on. It ended up working out exactly even, and we weren't even trying. We went through the whole list and picked what we wanted, and then we counted everything up, and we were like, how did that work out that way? So it was kind of a really magical, easy process. I will say that this is a copy of one of our catalog records for the collection. Everything is traced under the Robert McCammon collection at the Newberry, so you can pull all the books together very quickly. You can do this through Northwestern as well, so even though the books are split up, you can reconstruct it through both institutions. Ours are all plated. This is the Wing Foundation book plate. So it was a really fun, interesting process in which Scott and I spent a lot of time talking about our collections, what we collect, what the strengths of the library are, how we use artist books, which is always interesting to hear. And a university library is quite different than the Newberry, so I was really fascinated to hear how Scott used books with students or what he was looking for, so it was really fun. The collection, so Bob basically, I will say, bought books he liked from people he likes, which is a great way to collect. He wasn't a systematic collector, so he didn't set out to collect everything by a certain press or a book artist, although there are lots of presses that he likes, and I'll talk about a couple of those later. But made for very varied discussion. So the collection ranges from fine press printing, like this, which is from Windover Press. It's a book of poetry with really wonderful engraving by Barry Moser. This very charming piece from Warwick Press on poultry. I guess I got all of the W's as I was going through. I got a lot of W presses. And then it ranges all the way to things that don't look like books at all, like this piece called Collector's Tales by Jessica Spring. And I will say that this is one of the favorites of my colleagues who just like bringing out a calculator on a red velvet pillow for people. And Jessica Spring is another great favorite of Bob's. It is just a gamut. Some books I was already familiar with when I walked in the door, like Ken Botnick's Diderot Project, which you see on the cover of on the left, and some I had just never heard of, including this book by Robert Warhover. And it did turn out we were at home during this, and so I couldn't put my hands on a lot of books sometimes, and so sometimes we'd be Googling, trying to find stuff, and we'd come up with nothing. It turns out this book is held by the Flash Collection at SAIC and is digitized and is super charming. The biggest mystery, and I wish Scott was here to talk about this turned up after the original list was finished, and Bob wrote us to say that he'd found a mysterious valise, and he just had no idea what it was. And so we were like, oh, okay. And then we eventually did figure out what it was, and it's at Northwestern now, and it's called Searching for Siebold Suitcase Edition. It's super interesting, and it has an amazing catalog record that I looked at today, so I encourage you to look at it. The earliest item that came to the Newberry was this 1928 edition of Pope's essay on criticism, which is from 1928, very beautifully printed. The newest thing and is actually a book that came out last year. This is Jamie Murphy's Memento Civitatem, from Ireland. And I will say that in addition to Bob's generosity vis-a-vis giving us his collection, he's also to continue to support acquisitions by both Northwestern and the Newberry. So he always says, if you see something you want, let me know, and let me know how I can help you, which is extraordinarily generous. All of these editions as well are cataloged as part of the McCammon collection. And most of the collection is American. There are a few English, Irish things. Jamie Murphy, Bob and I both really like Jamie Murphy's work, and he's a really wonderful Irish printer who does a lot of wood type works, does a lot of really beautiful broadsides. This is a collection of broadsides by Irish poets about the Great War. He works with students a lot too, so they're always really wonderful to add to the collection. In Scott's absence, I wanted to show a few of the things that Northwestern acquired. So I will just say that these are actually images of our copies, but they have Bob's copies. I was really excited that Northwestern was getting so many books that I already loved and knew really well. So these include things like Jennifer Farrell's from Starshaped Press, The Almighty Starshaped. I collect most of what Jennifer prints. She had a fellowship here and has done a lot of work for the Newberry, so I was really excited. This is one of her many typographic odes to Chicago, so it was great for them to get this. They also got a lot of Russell Moret's work, maybe 8 or 10 things, and I remember thinking, what a treat to open a box and just get all of Russell's books, like how lovely. This is something that we already had in the collection, the Book of Jonah, and I will apologize. It looks kind of wavy. It's not printed that way. It's, of course, perfectly printed. It's just the way that I took the photograph. They also got, this is one that, like, sometimes I think, oh, I wish I had just kind of asked harder for that one, even though I'm just really being super greedy about certain things. So When Russell embarks on an endeavor to create a new typeface for monotype composition casting and put out a call for sponsors, I was like, yes, I'm totally in if I can sponsor the N for Newberry. I will point out that the Newberry was the only library sponsor. But Bob, as you can see, was also a sponsor. And if I'm reading the Northwestern catalog correctly, he sponsored the exclamation point, the letters B and M, and the ligature CT. That's a lot. That's a lot. So, in exchange for our support, we received a pattern, matrix, and piece of type for our letter, as well as all copies of ephemera printed from the type. So now in Chicago, we have five pieces, and we could print something together. And I will point out that you can't spell McCammon without the N. It is a capital N. I think Northwestern has all lowercase, but we could do something with that exclamation point. So when Bob had requested that when possible, all the books from a single press go to the same library. This didn't always work out, mostly because of the items that each library already had, so it was impossible to keep things together. But I'm also not beyond admitting that I just really, 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 really wanted the one Russell Moret book that we didn't have on the list, and that was Prometheus Bound. And in part, I wanted this because it had really beautiful smoke drawings on both the binding and the frontispiece. And I actually feel like Bob went through a smoke period at some point, because one of the other things in the collection, which is one of my favorite books, is Match in a Bottle from Catran Press, which includes, so all of the smoke drawings that you see, they're made directly on paper with smoke, so that what you see are not reproductions, they're all unique drawings in each copy. So this publication included over 800 original drawings that were done with matches, kerosene lamps, snaps, gold leaf, gunpowder, and cigarette lighters. The title page and each poem are accompanied by one of these drawings, so they're different. This was a book that I think sold out almost as soon as it was published, but Bob had 2 copies, so we each got one. And he's a big fan of Catran Press, and the other Catran Press things did go to Northwestern because the Newberry already had a copy. I will say, too, that the Wing collection doesn't strive to collect printers or presses in their entirety. It's a survey, but so we did have some Catran things, but it's another. I think I'm slightly jealous of Northwestern for having all of these. When going through the list, I kept in mind a few things about the Newberry's collection. I wanted books that were very much rooted in typographic design, or books that showcased exemplary or innovative printing processes, because ours is a history of printing collection. So I tried to apply the same principles that I would apply to any acquisition. The first day that we visited Bob's studio, he was really excited to show us Gaylord Channel X mayflies of the driftless region, which is inspired by Frederick M. Halford's 1897 dry fly entomology. So already a win in my heart. Halford, if you don't know, was the Victorian innovator and popularizer of modern fly fishing. Channel X book is a study of mayflies by the artist. Bob has a special edition, which includes a special box that has flies that were hand-tied for the edition. One of the things about the Newberry, showing books to people, is there's always somebody who loves the box, and it could be the most boring, mundane box, but this is really a box where people are like, can I see the box? And then there are also, so this is stunningly printed, right? It's so beautiful. These are all wood engravings. And not only does it include, so there are 13 depictions of mayflies with color wood engravings, with each hue printed from a separate block of end-grain maple. The images are the result of careful microscopic study of specimens collected from streams near Channel X home in rural Wisconsin. And then he invited an entomologist from the University of Wisconsin River Falls to write the text that accompanies it. I wanted this for the collection because the printing is sublime, and he's just such an amazing wood engraver. And then it also included progressive proofs. This special edition also included progressive proofs. And I really liked those because they serve as a means of explaining how complex the printing actually is for a book like this. And then, also, for the last several years, I have been trying to collect Midwestern printers, and he's about as Midwestern as you can get. And so this book just hit on every level for me, and I was really excited. Also, everyone loves this book. Everyone thinks it's really beautiful. Bob helped us to acquire another of Gaylord Chanelek's books made during the pandemic called American Crow, which is really very, very beautiful and very Midwestern, although I will just say that I think this is one of the more universal images in the book. It's not particularly more than Northwestern. This, I think, is one of my favorite acquisitions of the last few years. The other book that was really high on my list when I saw it was Ken Botnick's Diderot Project, which is an inquiry into craft and cognition or knowledge. I will also say that when Bob sent us his list of books, there was a note that says, "It's not in my possession right now because Martin Antonetti borrowed it." And I was like, I kind of see how this is going. And I was really worried that Martin just was not going to give it back. He did. So Botnick sees Diderot and his encyclopedia project as being about the organization of knowledge and the correlation of text and image, and the idea that workshops were hotbeds of experimentation and innovation. This is one of my favorites. So I will just say I love Diderot. I love the encyclopedia. I often play a game with my French tutor called "Would you rather be friends with Diderot, Rousseau, or Voltaire?" Which my French tutor is always like, "I don't want to play the game anymore." And I just feel like the encyclopedia is a book that celebrates craftsmanship, but also is so self-aware of its own making and its own composition. So when you see the image about composition and typesetting, and then you see the actual type on the printing on the next page, I think it's so beautiful. So Botnick's project is kind of this amazing feat of printing. It's 150 pages, but required 220 press runs using over 8 pounds of silver, black, gold, and transparent inks. The illustrations are extracted from plates of the encyclopedia and interwoven with the texts of over 40 authors in the form of entries for the encyclopedia. There are 6 different papers used, including a special handmade paper with watermarks based on the engravings, and the cover is a handmade flax paper that looks better the more that it's handled. It's intended to kind of look like leather. And this, so I think, again, this is really high-level printing. I think it's really innovative. It's a book that looks different every time you look at it, and depending on who's looking at it, how you're engaging with it. So I think it's fascinating, and I'm delighted to have it for the collection. There were other books, though, about typography and printing that I hadn't been familiar with, but I'm equally enthralled with. So these are 2 of the books where I was kind of like, I don't really know what these are. But I'll take them. And these are Barbara Henry's TH playbooks or playbooks. And what they really are, they're an investigation of the problem of the TH ligature in printing, but also the fricative, so like how do designers grapple with that? So these are imaginings of how we might represent that sound and that ligature. And the engravings are also really beautiful, or the prints are really beautiful. And then there are 2 of them. And this is one about Frederick Goudy, and then I wanted to use one. As I was looking through it, I was like, oh, Morris F. Benton, which is one of the Sherwin Beach books, is about Morris Benton and the ligatures used. So these, when I was looking at these the other day, I was like, I should use these all the time. These are really, really wonderful. Christine Tock was another artist I was totally unfamiliar with, but I couldn't resist this book, The Print S and the P, which is a reimagining of the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale featuring a printess instead of a princess. And the images created are incredibly elaborate. And what they are, they're collagraphs, which this is a technique in which the plate is constructed of adhered elements and inked with a roller or brush to produce the print in both relief and intaglio, and an embossed impression can be obtained by printing the plate dry without inking. So this is a book that's really tactile, so there are lots of things that are not inked but embossed, and lots of different textures. But it's also about being a woman printer, I think, and so it's a really fascinating meditation on that. So I actually use this all the time and enjoy it very much. I'm also the specialist in British literature and history here, and I'm particularly a specialist in our Shakespeare collection. So I always want artist books that think about Shakespeare or reimagine Shakespeare. And I think this is one where Scott was like, well, I would use that too. And I was like, forget it. I'm taking the Shakespeare stuff. And so I really was interested in the Caliban Press books. This is The Tempest. And he uses lots of kind of additions and thinks about different ways of presenting the text as a way of invoking the spirit of the play and what does it mean to read and understand a play. So I actually use these quite a lot. And then I took, just to keep things even, I took the other Caliban Press book that Bob had, which is actually really, really wonderful. It's a Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, which is very charming. And very indicative of the press. So both Scott and I were interested in work by women printers. So I was really excited. One of the things, again, this is something I saw when we went to Bob's studio. One of the things, Martin and I kind of both ran to this when we got into the studio. It's Julie Chen's True to Life. And so this is something I had sort of already wanted. We had a couple other smaller books by Julie Chen, but not this one. What we see here is the image that you see that appears on the page is one section of a long, continuous visual timeline that can never be viewed all at once. And so the text block is actually 12 leaves of color plates that are manipulated by the reader. And so along the sides of the book are numbered wooden levers corresponding to the page of the book to be revealed. So they move all these, you have to move them yourself, and they overlay one page upon the next, creating a patchwork narrative of events. So it's a physical structure that's super interesting, and it corresponds to this shifting nature of memory and how we tell stories. And thus alter the content of the piece deliberately or by chance with every reading. So it's a little bit like the Diderot or various ways in which the reader controls how the book is used and how the book is read. This works really well with students, both book art students who are interested in how the book is made and what her thought process was. But it also works really well with English students, literature students, people who, when we talk about a narrative or why a book has to look the way that it does, or how the way the physical book can change the way that we read it. And also people love interacting with books. So I think this is a huge hit with students. So a lot of times people will come to the library and they'll say, I'm interested in artist books. Can I see some? And we'll say, yes. are there any particular artists that you like? I would say, in my experience, my 24 years of experience at the library, 99% of the time they say, no, just show me something interesting. And the other 1% of the time they say, Claire Van Vliet. So who's a good person to say, right? So this is Aunt Sally's Lament, and I will say this is actually sort of I won't call it mass market, but it's sort of the mass market version of an original that she did with Margaret Kaufman. And Aunt Sally's Lament has been described as a poem that is an autobiography of a spinster quilter, stitched with mutterings that accumulate as the cut pages are turned, becoming a diamond quilt shape. Also, I apologize for how dirty the futon was when I was taking pictures of this. So the variously shaped leaves are made up of a complex series of cutout pastel paper that mimic the patterns of a quilt. And the book was designed by Van Vliet as an accordion fold format that can stretch out. So again, it's a book that changes with every reading. It's super fun and super beautiful and really witty and personal. But what's so nice about this is that we also got from Bob's collection a piece by Claire Van Vliet and Elizabeth Steiner that are really about interlocking book structures. And one of the things that I hadn't realized when I picked this is that it actually has all of these little examples of all the interlocking structures. So it's both a reference book about artist books and book structures, but it is itself an artist book. It is a way. It's really fun to see. And I'm super grateful to have both Aunt Sally's Lament. And then one of the first things I saw when I opened the box was the structure for Aunt Sally's Lament. One of my favorite book artists is Jessica Spring of Springtide Press. Our photographer here at the Newberry confided that these are the most difficult books she's ever had to photograph, and she never wants to see them again. She had so much trouble photographing them because they're super interesting, complicated structures, and they kind of have a life of their own. This is the best one we got of Honey Beehive. Which is a specimen of bees that she had in her collection and is designed in a honeycomb or hive pattern itself. And this is from Vintage Wood and Metal Type at Springtide Press. On the right is Parts Unknown, which is, Jessica wrote, it's a collaboration between herself and photographers who lived in her home a century ago. She found a box of glass plate negatives in her attic. And so she reprinted them. And they document a new leisure class in a city moving beyond its frontier origins in Washington. The book unfolds, it's pretty complicated, into 4 accordion chapters that converge at both a literal and historical crossroads, transporting the viewer to the 1890s. This is really nice. We do have an important collection that focuses on westward expansion, and so this actually goes really nicely with that as well. And then Collector's Tales, which is the calculator and a velvet pillow. This is super charming, and it doesn't look. It's actually quite serious. It kind of looks a little comical, but it's a series of boxes about collectors and what they collect, and she made up a series of little trade cards about each collector, and then just each one of the collectors gave her something to include in the box. Our person was a calculator collector, and there he is with all of them. And I will say that I'm a little envious of whoever has the box containing about the woman who collected coat hangers, who was a Chicagoan. And I love her quote, which is, "I'm really nuts about my hangers." So there's also a booklet that goes with this. It's a fascinating look at collecting and this idea of people who have these ideas, like have these obsessions that are sort of odd, but like once collected, they're totally fascinating. And so I really liked that idea of collecting and collectors. So I mentioned at the beginning, or towards the beginning of this talk, or possibly in the middle, that I have a series of rules or principles that I keep in mind when selecting books. We're very much a history printing collection. I try to collect things that are editioned. I don't collect unique books, and various other things. And I try to adhere to that. So several years ago, I was at a conference at the Grolier Club about artist books, and Ruth Rogers, a curator at Wellesley College, was talking about how she too had a set of guiding principles. And then she said, but oftentimes those principles go out the window when I see something I like. And I'm probably misquoting her, but her comment was something like, I buy things that I want to look at a second time, a third time, a fourth time. So I do have this set of rules for myself, but you also have to buy things that you love. And so I wanted to talk about my favorite book in the collection that everybody will probably be like, why? And I probably already spoiled it. But it is Candace Hicks's Common Threads, which is one in a series of unique books that she makes entirely by hand and look like composition books. So she's made dozens of these, but they're all unique, so it's not properly an edition. And so I don't know that I ever could have justified buying one of these, even though I really love it. And they're all different. And these are just some other ones that she's made. And the covers always represent what is on the inside. So the inside bit is meant to be like pages from her journal. I'm really fascinated by these. They're totally fantastic. I'm really fascinated by this. I was drawn to this because when Scott and I were dividing up this collection, I was in the thick of curating an exhibition about handwriting for the Newberry, which was in 2022. And so the exhibition was on 500 years of handwriting, but I was particularly interested in the recreation of handwriting in print. So I was totally fascinated on like, why are we so interested in things that look like handwriting but are not handwriting? And that immediately drew me to this. Like, I would have put this in the exhibition if I could have. And I was intrigued by the connection between writing and needlework, between women's work and other kinds of production. And I loved the idea that she literally plays with the idea of making books by hand. Like, if you're somebody who makes books by hand, what does that mean? Well, you sew them. Like, I'm completely interested by that. And so I think this is an interesting companion to other things in the collection, and I like to put it next to something like the Diderot Project. Like, you're both thinking about the same types of things like craftsmanship and innovation and text and image, but how do people use those things in entirely different ways? And also, I'm going to say she's really funny, like she's really, really funny. And so this book, it has a Ouija board on the covers, because she's talking about a Ouija board, and it has this little piece sewn into it as well, because in the opening pages, she starts musing about how she's listening to a podcast and nobody knows what the name for the little piece of the Ouija board that you move is. A few weeks ago, I showed this to my colleagues, and I had this one colleague, and as I started talking about this book, she's like, planchette, planchette, planchette. And I was like, yes, that's what it is. And so the collection, this probably is not Bob's favorite book by a mile, but it's a deeply personal collection that I have loved spending time with over the past few years, and loved talking to Scott Kraft about it and talking to other people about it, and then using it in different ways here at the Newberry. And so I will end by saying that if all of you came and looked at the books, I'm sure everybody would have a different favorite, and that's what makes it such a wonderful collection. And so I invite invite you to explore the Robert McCammon collection at the Newberry and Northwestern for yourself. So thank you. So we have a few minutes, so apparently I'm going to ask myself questions. People are just mentioning how much they like women printers and Gaylord Channel X, so totally agree with those things. So somebody asked me about the interest in female printers and how the role of women has changed from the past to the present and my anticipation for their future role. So women in general, I think, have a bright future. I will say something that Newberry is really interested in, and all libraries are really interested in collecting women printers, but also thinking about there have always been women printers, and even in 15th century books, there were women printers and women publishers, and they're there, and so it's something that I think there are rich collections already in the library that are ripe for research, and there are lots of people who are working on that. There are also people in Chicago and elsewhere. So Jennifer Farrell from Star Shaped Press is somebody who is a really great champion of other women printers and women in the industry. So Jennifer Spring as well. So I think there are wonderful people in the industry right now. So somebody asked about the differences between the Newberry and Northwestern. So in general, so there are collections, which is a great question. First of all, I think that university libraries buy what instructors are interested in using and teaching for their classes. And here, I think it tends to be more curator's choice. Like it's more like, what does the curator think is interesting, and how does the curator want to grow the collection? We certainly get classes coming in to use books. I think at university libraries, they tend to collect artist books more for subject than necessarily printing history, although printing history can certainly play a part of it. So if you have, at the University of Chicago, they have great science collections, so they might look for books that, artist books that talk about the history of science or think about that. And I will say, too, that I get a lot of enjoyment of putting artist books next to their historic counterparts. So that's one of the reasons that I do like the Diderot so much. Or, let me see what else here. Did Bob tell you what his collection criteria were? As far as I know, they were things, and we had talked to him afterwards. They were books that he liked, right? They were books he liked. So he spent a lot of time every year going around to different book fairs. And one of the things about book fairs is there are loads of other book artists there, and you walk around and you see what other people are doing. You see what's new. You meet new people. You see old friends. You see the projects that are out on the table, but you also hear the projects that are in process. So there are books that he bought. And then there are also artists that he liked, and I also will say that a lot of artists that you see him that he bought books from also contributed to his own books for Sherwin Beach. So Michael Russum, for example, or so you see these kind of connections within that. But you can talk to him about that later at dinner. And there are some very specific books about questions about smoke prints. I don't know those answers off the top of my head, but I welcome you to send me an email or Scott an email, and we can answer those, or come in and look at the books yourself. So I think those are all of the questions that we have. If you have other questions but didn't manage to, I can never manage to text them. You have to text it, John. Please, you can come and find me afterwards or find Bob. And thank you so much for coming in. Please do come look at the collection. It's really wonderful. So thank you.